Okay, so first of all, if you're coming in and you take a multivitamin, I want you to go and actually grab your multivitamin so that you can look at what you're taking in comparison to
Okay, so
essentially
first of all,
what um, what I'm going to be discussing. Okay, it looks like we're live on YouTube. So I'll give you a moment to do that. So if you take a multivitamin, um, go grab it. So I'll give you a moment to grab it. I hope everyone's doing well, not too stressed over everything with COVID and the presidential election. And I just, it's one of those crazy things that we're dealing with. But I think hopefully we can sort of think about it and realize that, politics is just sort of something that we have to deal with, but it really isn't what makes the most change in the world. It's really, not the thing that matters the most. So maybe we just focus on that. Hopefully, if you are taking a multivitamin and you brought it, so we can get started. All right, so let's get started. Let me share my screen. And as I said, tonight we're going to be discussing multivitamins, and I've entitled it Yes or No. Should we be taking a multivitamin or not? Well, I can tell you right now that I think everyone should be taking some kind of multivitamin. There are certain circumstances where maybe you don't need to take a multivitamin, and you can take certain particular ones that you might need to take for various different reasons. So tonight we're going to talk about vitamins of concern, minerals of concern. So there are certain things that you do need to be careful about, why you absolutely need to take a multivitamin, in my opinion, and then special supplements, vitamins, minerals of note. So that's what we're going to be talking to about tonight. All right, so let's go into it right away. So here are the vitamins that you should be concerned about. We'll go into a little bit more in detail. And one of the things is that you'll see as we go through this, and that I've discussed on various other weeks, is that it's impossible to duplicate the complexity of food. We know that there are 1 or 200 vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals that we have data on, and the science tells us that there are literally up to 30,000, literally 30,000 of these phytonutrients that we don't even have good data on as to what they do. So it is sort of a form of arrogance for us to be able to think that we could come up with, some sort of supplement that is going to somehow be like food. And the answer is, of course, we can't do that. And so we have to rely on what essentially is a very narrow scientific view or scientific amount of knowledge that we might have to be able to make these decisions. So we'll go through these, and I think you'll get a real clear understanding of why it's important to have a little bit better of an understanding. So hopefully everyone who's come on has gone to their cabinets. I see there are more people coming in, so I'll just remind them or mention that if you do take a multivitamin, go run into your cabinet and have it next to you while we go through tonight's episode, which I believe is episode 34. So we've been doing this for 34 weeks now. Thank you all. I see a bunch of people that are regulars here. So welcome. All right, so first is something called alpha tocopherol, which is the most active form of vitamin E that we have in our bloodstream, but it is really only one form of vitamin E. There's lots of different forms of vitamin E. There are actually 8 forms. And it is true that 90% of Americans do not meet the average requirement. But the problem is that there have been some studies that show that isolated alpha tocopherol could potentially be a problem. And while someone who is deficient in vitamin E, which can happen but doesn't happen often, even though 90% of Americans do not meet the average requirement, don't need all that much alpha tocopherol as a supplement. The problem is when you're taking alpha tocopherol and you're not getting it with other forms of vitamin E, because if you're getting them in your nuts and seeds, as an example, you're getting them mixed with all kinds of other types of vitamin E. Now, there's alpha tocopherol, there's beta tocopherol, there's gamma tocopherol, and then there's something called tocotrienols. So the tocotrienols, tocotrienols, all of these are various forms of vitamin E. And you're going to be getting them in natural foods, basically. And if you get them with natural foods, then you don't really have to worry about it. But if you're isolating it as alpha tocopherol by itself, that potentially could be a problem. So if you're looking at your supplement, you really shouldn't have more than 400 international units of vitamin of alpha tocopherol. Now, when you look on a supplement, it often says something like vitamin E as, and then in parentheses, as alpha tocopherol. If it says vitamin E and then it says as mixed tocotrienols, then that's probably not an issue. It's only if it says vitamin E in alpha tocopherol in parentheses, and then it's got a very high dose, more than 400 international units. Sometimes it'll list something that is not international units. It will say micrograms. So you'll need to do that conversion. And it really shouldn't have more than 400 IUs of alpha tocopherol. But again, if it has the other forms or mixed forms, which are very potent antioxidants and probably are fine, then you are probably okay. If it says a mix of alpha, beta, and gamma tocopherols, that would also be okay. But if it's isolated alpha tocopherol and it's higher than 400 IUs a day, then you probably is not a good idea. Okay, next is beta carotene. Now, before we talk about beta carotene, it's in the form of carotenoids. There's 750 of these pigments that are called carotenoids. And beta carotene, there's also alpha carotene, and there are lots of other kinds of carotenes. Unfortunately, there was a study done called the CARET trial, that basically, that's C-A-R-E-T actually, and that study showed that in smokers, it basically showed an increase in lung cancer for people who were smokers. Now, there were other studies that looked at beta carotene isolated by itself, and in those particular cases where the people weren't smokers, there wasn't an increase in cancer, but nonetheless, beta carotene got a bad name. And thinking about how we just spoke about alpha tocopherol, the same thing goes with beta carotene. Beta carotene, again, is one of 750. With vitamin E, of course, there are 8 forms. But as far as carotenoids, the family of carotenoids, there are 750 of them. Now, it's one of those things like that we were talking about, that isolating a certain nutrient by itself, like this really narrow isolation of beta carotene, it makes sense in a way that you are risking some sort of issue because you're isolating it in an abnormal way. So that is potentially a problem. Now, beta carotene in the body essentially gets converted into vitamin A. And as a result of that, when you look at a bottle, if you have your bottle with you, sometimes it'll say vitamin A and then in parentheses as beta carotene or as mixed carotenoids, something like that. So you don't want, generally speaking, unless you're a smoker and you're getting large doses of beta carotene, you're taking like an isolated beta carotene supplement, it's probably not going to be that damaging to you. If you're a smoker and you're taking high doses of beta carotene, it's probably not a good idea. The best thing to do is to focus on getting carotenoids, especially all of these pigments that are in your, basically in your food. So let's talk a little bit about carotenoids. So they scavenge for free radicals, which is basically is part of your metabolic process. And there are ones you've probably heard of. So lutein and zeaxanthin, which have a specific ability to filter blue light. We've spoken about blue light in other episodes about how damaging it can be and how it can affect your circadian rhythms, as well as actually damaging the macula in your eyes. It also helps protect your skin against ultraviolet light. When it comes to heart, blood, and brain protection, lycopene is also a carotenoid. We've all heard of lycopene, generally speaking, because it's in tomato products, especially things like tomato paste, where it's really, really concentrated. And obviously, you don't want to supplement just with lycopene. We're talking here about just the fact that we have some isolated data on lycopene. They've done studies on lycopene, but what did we speak about when we were talking about it here? There's 750 naturally occurring pigments called carotenoids. So you want to be able to get them in natural foods. It actually prevents LDL oxidation, which is what happens to LDL when it becomes dangerous. It inhibits the enzyme that actually is the same enzyme that is inhibited by statin drugs, which means that it can actually lower your cholesterol a bit. In fact, 1 cup of tomato juice or 3 to 4 tablespoons of tomato paste was reported to reduce LDL cholesterol by 10%. So supplements don't work. We spoke about the beta-carotene studies. And 2 weeks of a tomato-rich diet improved endothelial function as well. So this is the inside lining of the blood vessels. And if you have really healthy endothelial cells, this is really important for your arteries, in your heart, actually your arteries throughout your body, including in your genitals. You want to have endothelial function to allow the blood vessels to open up and function the way you want them to. Some people are avoiding tomatoes for various reasons, one being they might be on a plant paradox diet, or they have maybe an autoimmune disease and they're on a nightshade-free diet. Whatever the reason is, there are other foods that have lycopene in them, including guava, watermelon, and pink grapefruit. But we're talking mostly now about supplements, but I wanted to give you some context here, because without the context of understanding how wide-ranging these carotenoids are, I'm hoping that you start to see how just isolating one thing like beta-carotene is unnatural. It means that you don't have a clear understanding that you would think that you could just isolate one of these, take it as a supplement, and have some major improvement. You want to get them in your food. Now, as I said, sometimes when you look at vitamin A on the bottle, it says as beta-carotene. And that's going to be safer than if it says retinol or non-carotenoids. We'll get into that in just a moment. Okay, moving on to B6. Only problem at high dose. It's good. It lowers homocysteine. There's a whole host of other reasons, but believe it or not, at high doses, and this has been reported many times in literature, people taking high doses of B6, which could just be in a B complex vitamin. Taking too much B6 can actually damage your nerves. It can start with tingling and progress to actually nerve damage. There was a famous case report of an Olympic athlete who was taking high doses of a B complex and started to get toxicity such that they were losing control of their grip strength in their hands. A lot of people think, well, B complex, B vitamins, generally speaking, are water soluble. That's sort of what you're taught. The one thing you're taught in medical school, that it's hard for you to overdose on B vitamins because they are water soluble, and so they're going to go through you. Basically, if you take too much, you just urinate them out. But actually, B6 and even high doses of B3, which is niacin, in the wrong way can cause problems. So that sort of water soluble thing is a bit of a myth. Vitamin A can be toxic at high doses and can reduce bone density. Actually, obviously, it's related. It's part of bone metabolism, but unfortunately, at higher levels can reduce bone density, even levels as high as 6,000 international units. So you should look on your supplement, and unless it says vitamin A as carotenoids, if it says vitamin A as retinol or retinol palmitate or various things like that, then it should have no more than 5,000 international units per day. If anyone has any questions, just type them into the chat box. The next one is folic acid. So this is one that a lot of people are not aware of. It's becoming a little bit more well-known, but Now you'll know the reasons why you do not want folic acid at all in your supplement, like zero. You don't need folic acid, you need folate. Folic acid is synthetic. And I know you've heard that pregnant women are suggested to take folic acid, and people on certain medications are told to take folic acid, but it's not folic acid you need. Folic acid is synthetic. Folate is what you need, which is found in leafy green vegetables. So if you're eating a lot of leafy green vegetables, you do not need to take folic acid. So during pregnancy, if a woman is eating a lot of green vegetables, she's going to get enough. And smart prenatal vitamins are going to provide folate, but also the doctor is going to suggest that she continue or start to increase her consumption of green vegetables, because that's where you're really going to get folate. There's a possibility that when you look at all these studies in multivitamins and they say, there's no improvement or anything of that sort, it could be related to folic acid, because the body has limited capacity to convert folic acid. And unfortunately, if you have certain genetic susceptibilities, it can lead to something that is toxic in your body. A lot of people have those genes, and there's folic acid in so many things. There's folic acid in enriched flour. There's folic acid in all kinds of fortified foods. I don't know the history behind why they decided to do folic acid. It's probably cheaper, maybe easier to ice, maybe easier to make than folate. But the fact is that your body has limited capacity, and for some people, they have even further limited capacity to convert folic acid to another form that is used in the body. As I said, it's synthetic and not natural, and there's some evidence that circulating unmetabolized folic acid can reduce immunity and foster cancer. And it's one of these things that a lot of people just aren't really aware of. And I happen to have the gene that makes it more susceptible for me to not be able to metabolize folic acid. So no one should have folic acid in their multivitamin. So if you're looking now on your bottle and it has folic acid, you're going to want to switch to a different company. Okay, all right, so let's keep on moving. And now we're going to go to minerals of concern. So these are copper, iron, and calcium. We'll speak about it just briefly. Now, copper is necessary, and some multis have copper. The issue is, there are many issues, but the main one is that you don't need that much of it. And it's very difficult for you to be copper deficient. The other problem is if you're taking high doses, or the other complexity is if you're taking high doses of zinc, you're going to want to actually take copper. But just copper by itself is not something that you need to take. So look on the side of your multivitamin, and if it has zinc of 15 milligrams or 30 milligrams, then it should have 1 milligram of copper, roughly this ratio. If it has 15 milligrams of zinc, it doesn't have to have copper. But if you're getting higher doses of zinc, which we'll talk about a little bit later, of 50 milligrams or whatever the case is, there's reasons to take a high dose like that. We'll talk about it later. You're going to want a 1 to 15 milligram ratio. So if you have zinc in your supplement, look for a ratio of approximately 1 to 15 or thereabouts. It doesn't have to be exactly that. It could be that, you have, 20 milligrams and, maybe it's 1 milligram of copper. But the point is as you increase the dose of zinc, you do need copper. But if you're taking a reasonably low dose or optimal, I should say 15 to 25 milligram dose of zinc, you don't need to take copper. But if it has this ratio in the supplement, it's fine, no problem. Iron, increased cancer and heart disease risk, more of a concern in men and postmenopausal women. No need for a man to have iron in their supplement, their multivitamin. or postmenopausal women. Obviously, for women who are not just women who have heavy menstrual bleeding, but most multivitamins for women who are, um, you know, still getting their period, they usually have a little bit of iron because there's increased iron need in women. But for men, it's going to potentially increase your heart disease risk. So if you're taking a multi for men, and it has iron in it, or you're just taking a general multi and it has iron, then I would avoid that. I would suggest that you look for a different multivitamin. Calcium is another complicated one. It's probably more of a problem if it's supplemented alone. There's probably no one really that needs to take calcium by itself. However, obviously, women who are postmenopausal often take calcium, but if it's not sort of combined with magnesium, D, or K2, if it has no combination, it's probably not a good idea. You probably want to get one that has some science behind it that is mixing or combining D, calcium, and I should say D3 here, K2, magnesium, and not all of these necessarily. A lot of supplements have D3 and calcium. You probably don't want to take it by itself. In men, it's probably just not a good idea. There are some studies, more than one, that show some increase in heart attack and stroke, as well as other cardiovascular problems. So the way to think about all of these, by the way, and I would refer you back to probably maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, I did a lecture on micronutrients, and I showed you the example of my micronutrient blood test. Now, you can't just get calcium as a regular lab, because calcium is maintained in your bloodstream like in a very tight, narrow range, because if your calcium is out of whack in your blood, you can have some serious problems. The way you need to get it is to get a special micronutrient panel, like the one I showed in that particular episode, such that they can look at calcium inside the cells to see what your actual calcium levels are. I refer you back to that. So all of these things like iron, copper, magnesium, and all the vitamins that we're talking about that you can get in a micronutrient panel like the one that I showed you. The one that I use is a company from Vibrant America Labs. That's the name of the company. And they test, not only do they test the minerals, vitamins, they test essential fatty acids as well. So it's a really good test. And really, it's the only way for, obviously, following these general guidelines is fabulous. But to really get sort of ironclad info, then a micronutrient panel like the one that I went over in that class, in that episode, would be really valuable. Okay, so why do you need to take a multivitamin? Well, let's talk about it. So first of all, most Americans are eating a nutritionally deficient diet. That's just the way it goes. And we have to deal with that. And the only way to deal with that is if, not everyone's going to perfect their diet. So a multivitamin can be that extra insurance. Next, foods in the past contained higher levels of micronutrients. So those particular nutrient levels were higher. They're just not there anymore, partly because of poor soil, partly because of monocropping. There are lots of different reasons. Processed foods of all types are devoid of nutrients. That's why ages ago, they came up with sort of the RDA levels. Those levels are really just to prevent actual, disease manifestations of nutrients, of lack of vitamins. That doesn't mean it's the optimal level. It just means that you're not going to have a very specific disease happen. And that's why they had to fortify these processed foods. Environmental toxins and stress make our requirements more because, in our liver, when we detoxify, the natural process of detoxifying chemicals from the environment the cofactors or the things that allow these processes to take place are minerals and vitamins. They are there to help the enzymes do what they're supposed to do, to take a foreign substance and move it through the steps of your liver to detoxify. That's what one of the main things that your liver does. And because we're exposed to so many more environmental toxins and stress, our requirements for these are more. Next is if you're a vegan, there are certain vegan considerations, and we'll go into all of these in detail in the next section. But they are B12, K2, zinc, iodine, DHA, and zinc. And for all of us, K2 is a concern, zinc is of concern, iodine is of concern, two zincs here. So let's go into it right now. But basically, for vegans who are not eating any animal products, these specific nutrients are of consideration. B12, because B12 is found only in animals, and it is found in some things like chlorella, and there actually on the Miracle Noodle site we have a plant-based source of B12 in the form of palmyra, which we sell it as Sugar Vita, which is a type of palmyra nectar that can be used as a sweetener that has a very high level of B12, one of the highest levels of naturally occurring B12 in plants. Check that out. K2 is found most commonly in foods that have a lot of saturated fat, like aged cheeses. So vegans aren't going to be getting that. There is one amazing source, and we'll talk about that in the next section. Zinc, same thing. One of the reasons is, when you're eating a lot of plants, there's something called phytic acid or phytates that actually can bind zinc if you're eating a lot of nuts and seeds and beans, and that can lower your zinc levels. Iodine, we'll get into that, and DHA, which is a type of fish oil. There are a lot of controversies in the vegan community about DHA, but I do recommend it for my patients who are vegan and have that. This would be almost like an entire lecture, but basically, not everyone can convert omega-3 from nuts and seeds like flax or hemp into the long chain of DHA, which is really critical for your brain, as an example. And not everyone can do that. So there are people who have a gene that prevents them from efficiently converting the oil flax omega-3s into DHA. For those people, or just for vegans in general, you only need a small amount of DHA, and that would be thinking about it in this extra insurance kind of idea that we've been talking about in terms of why you need to take a multivitamin. All right, so let's go into those particular supplements of note and talk about them a little bit more. Let me close this down and move this up here. Okay. So these are supplements of note. First is B12. Even as we get older, our potential to absorb B12 goes down. So your multi probably should have some B12 in it, regardless of whether if you're a vegan or not. B12 would be something that you would want to have. Iodine is becoming a nutrient of concern. Obviously, we all know that salt has iodine in it, but the problem is we're probably not getting enough of it. And therefore, your supplement should have iodine in it. You need around 150 micrograms per day. Most people are suggesting, or there are some people out there who are suggesting 300 micrograms a day. 150 micrograms in your supplement is probably enough, because you're probably going to get a little bit more from other things like the salt that you eat during the day, or obviously there are sources of iodine like seaweed, but not all of us are eating seaweed on a regular basis. So you do want to have a multivitamin that has at least 150 micrograms per day. The other thing to note is that we may be getting it in salt, but there are also things called goitrogens, which are going to prevent iodine from being used in the thyroid. So let's speak about that briefly. believe it or not, cyanide in smokers is going to prevent iodine from working. Cruciferous vegetables, especially raw cruciferous vegetables, like kale, collards, broccoli, cauliflower, mustard greens, these are all cruciferous vegetables. And if you're eating a lot of them raw, like in a big salad, cabbage as well, that can prevent the iodine from doing what it's supposed to do for optimizing your thyroid health. Medicines like lithium and some seizure medicines can also interfere. Unprocessed, properly, I should say, not unprocessed cassava, but cassava that hasn't been processed correctly, like if it hasn't been soaked properly and roasted properly, can have a lot of goitrogens in them. And I think it was in Nigeria, or might have been, I can't remember exactly where, but I think it was Nigeria, where they had in sort of an epidemic of goiter, because of the cassava that was not prepared properly. Same thing with millet, unprepared, unsoaked, if it's a large part of your diet. Soybean isoflavones can also act as goitrogens. Again, the reason we've spoken a lot about what's the natural amount of soybean product that people eat and that you should follow, and that is probably, well, what they would eat in Asia, which is not as much as you might think. A little bit of tofu. They're historically, we're not drinking gallons or glasses of soy milk throughout the years. It would have a little bit of soy. So excess soy consumption is going to also interfere with that. And then there are also some toxins in the environment. So going back to our insurance philosophy here, you definitely want a multivitamin to have around 150 micrograms a day of iodine. Zinc. Zinc's very important. It's important these days because it is important for our immune health, and everyone should be taking zinc. And the problem with zinc is that the dose is very important, and people are taking too much zinc. Now, there are companies, like I use a lot of Life Extension Foundation supplements. I don't take their multivitamin, and I don't take their zinc. I don't take their zinc supplement either, because the zinc supplement they have, the lowest dose is 50 milligrams. You don't need that much. You only need 15 to 25 milligrams, because as I stated, if you take 50 milligrams of zinc, that's going to mess up your copper levels. And if there are reasons, like for example, in dermatology, there's certain skin conditions that respond well to higher doses of zinc. And you have to take 50 milligrams or sometimes even more to get that impact. In those cases, then we prescribe zinc with copper. There's certain companies that will sell copper, zinc with copper in that ratio, roughly in that ratio that we spoke about before. But if you're taking zinc, again, don't take more than 15 to 25 milligrams a day. 15 to 25 milligrams a day is going to give you exactly what you need. We spoke about phytates. We didn't speak about phytates, but basically if you're eating a lot of nuts and seeds and beans, that can lower zinc absorption, but that doesn't mean you should get rid of those. Those are all obviously beneficial to your health. Just something for you to be aware of, and is another reason why vegans should supplement with zinc. But all of us, especially with COVID, should be taking at least 15 to 25 milligrams of zinc per day. If you don't want to take it in a multivitamin, then buy zinc by itself. I think it's one of the supplements that almost many people are already deficient in, and you're not going to do any harm by taking 15 to 25 milligrams. Vitamin D is another one that if it's not in your multivitamin, you probably need to supplement with it. Most people do need to supplement it, and most multivitamins don't have enough. Most multivitamins have enough as a maintenance dose. After you've taken a high dose to get your level into the range of 40 to 80, all of you should know what your vitamin D levels are. And you need to take vitamin D3. You cannot just rely on the dose. You need to get your level checked. And as I say almost every week, you can get your own D level checked. You can walk into a lab. You can like Any Labs Now, or even LabCorp and Quest have ways now of you being able to order your own tests or ask your doctor. But look, I'm then will be covered by insurance, but I have a lot of patients who, after listening to a lot of my episodes, are starting to take control of this themselves and starting to order some of these labs on their own. Of course, the micronutrient panel that I discussed before is just fabulous. The problem is it's not covered by insurance, and it runs somewhere between it runs around $300. That's pretty steep of a price, but is also gives you a lot of guidance as to where to go with everything we're speaking about: zinc and K2 and magnesium, everything. But look, you don't need to necessarily get your zinc level checked, but vitamin D level, you need to get that checked for sure. I hope that's clear. Next, K2, very, very important. K1 is found in leafy greens, but K2 helps with bone density. So does K1, of course, but very important with cardiovascular health. It was shown in a study in Rotterdam that people who have higher levels of K2 in their blood had less calcification in their arteries, last longer in the body. And unfortunately, as I said, it's found high in foods that are high in saturated fat, which you're not going to want to go crazy with. So how do you get K2? Well, you can get it in a supplement form, but don't forget natto. I've spoken about that before. It's a food that a lot of people don't like to eat, but I will say that it's becoming a little bit more popular. It's a fermented soybean, and the fermentation helps sort of reduce some of the theoretical toxicity of getting a high level of soy, but you don't need more than a tablespoon or two. Unfortunately, it's a very acquired taste. It's a national product sort of in Japan, and there are communities in Japan where they really feel like in certain communities where they're eating more natto, there's a much reduced level of breast cancer, and so they think there's some pretty potent anti-cancer effects as well. But I will say that, as many of you know, I've traveled to Japan quite a bit, and I happen to like natto and eat it on a regular basis. And if you remember my micronutrient test that I did, my K2 levels were very good, definitely because of the natto. Getting back to the topic at hand, your supplement, your multivitamin should have K2 in it. And the K2 that you're looking for is anaquinone 7, or MK7 is usually how it's listed. You're going to want to have some of that in your multivitamin as well. Magnesium. Obviously, if you have heart disease or you have some kidney issues, then you need to work with your doctor. But in general, you want to have some form of magnesium in your supplement. And I'm not suggesting necessarily that your supplement needs to have a really good fiber, but but consider taking something like Glucomannan, which is found in miracle noodles. But it's also been studied extensively, and just it alone, just eating one serving or taking a Glucomannan powder mixed into your smoothie, or blending. We have people who blend our noodles in their smoothies to make it actually have like a little bit of a creamy texture because of the fiber. It can be really helpful to your diet. And also consider berry polyphenols. A fair number of supplements of multivitamins actually have a fair number, they put in berry polyphenols. These are non-caloric parts of the berry, and the best parts of the berry in essence. And other plant extract supplements, there are certain green powders or polyphenol powders that you can add to, say, a smoothie or have as a drink, or a whole host of different kinds of things. So hopefully everyone who's watching was looking at their multivitamin, if they have a multivitamin, and checking to see how it goes, how what we spoke about matches with the multivitamin that they're taking. that is tonight's class. I noticed that, well, we haven't had any. If please make a comment if you were um, looking at your multivitamin or not, and if there is something that you had feel like you need to change your multivitamin. I can tell you for most people, there's still a ton of supplements with folic acid, and there's still a fair number uh, with iron and calcium. Of course, we went through all those sorts of things, and really, I think that I always say that when someone comes in and they show me their bag of vitamins, I always ask them, why are you taking this? Why are you taking that? And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't know why they're taking it. And one of the reasons that I gave this lecture, and I also spoke about vitamins probably around 10 weeks ago, and sort of through a different lens, is because we really should have a clear understanding of why we're taking these multivitamins or vitamins in general. Obviously, there are things like people have high triglycerides, they take fish oil, or if they're on a statin, they take CoQ10. Those are individual types of things. But when you look at it from the perspective of a multivitamin, then that's a different story altogether. And you need to be able to look at these things like vitamin A, folic acid, beta carotene, isolated alpha tocopherol, all these things, so that it is not a concern. Oh, I see there's a class, there's a question. Sharon is asking, is it a good strategy to take multivitamin 3 times a week rather than daily? I do this with fish oil as well. It depends on the dose. If you're, I do take a multivitamin. It's a multivitamin that has relatively low doses because of the fact that I'm eating a fair number. It's just that little extra insurance. In that case, then I take it every day. I think if the doses are higher than what we've spoken about, and you're eating a really healthy diet, then it makes sense. Or you should look at, if the dosing was too high, then maybe look to see if there's another multivitamin that you can just take on a daily basis. But if the doses are higher than what we've spoken about, you can definitely take it 3 times a week. Sure. It's, again, just sort of as an insurance, as long as it doesn't have any of the negative things that we spoke about. Hopefully, Sharon, it doesn't have any of those, and you have a good multi. So, any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, actually, I have a guest tonight. I haven't brought Lucy on in a while, but Lucy's sleeping here, so figured I would. She wanted to say hi, so hope everyone's doing well. And I wish everyone a good night. Hopefully you're not going to go and watch politics now. That's never a good idea. But I look forward to seeing you next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about protein, the sort of complexities of how to decide how much animal protein to eat, just protein in general. So many controversies in that. When you get through that particular talk, you're really going to understand sort of the complexities of it, and you'll be able to know for yourself how much protein you need to get. So wish everyone a good night and stay well, and I'll see you next week.